listening to Pharmacy, IT, and Me, your Informatics Pharmacist podcast. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pharmacy, IT, and Me podcast. My name is Tony, I'm your host today, and joining me today is Dr. Doina Dumitru from BD. She's a Senior Director in Medical Affairs, and we're going to be talking about her career path and, how she's involved in healthcare technology. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Tony. So excited to spend some time with you this morning. Really excited.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm pretty excited to talk about you too, because it's pretty interesting whenever I talk to anybody on that side of, on the health tech vendor or anything like that, since I'm on the hospital system side. So it's always interesting to kind of hear about people's trajectory and, getting into that. But, just before we get started, can you tell listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, you bet. So I've been in practice now for a little bit over 20 years. Hard to believe how fast that time has flown. I've had a very eclectic career, as I like to say. I've done a lot of different things in my career, a truly amazing opportunity. And I started my career actually in Chicago right after graduating pharmacy school, and I practiced there for a while. And then we eventually moved to Houston, where I still live today and with my family, and have two boys, almost college age, sad to say, but definitely a very interesting and getting ready to enter a new chapter in our lives as well.
Awesome. Wow. So you're pretty well into your career path right now. And, I always am interested in hearing what really got people started. And for you, where did you kind of get that idea of just getting into that field of pharmacy in the first place?
Yeah. It's funny because I think the more you go in your career, at least for me, I don't know that I spend so much time thinking about those early inspiring moments. But I think it is important to reflect, what got you going in the first place? And I think for me, it actually started back in high school. And it was back then, it was really pretty darn simple. It was, I really like chemistry, but I really hate bodily fluids. And further, I was simply fascinated by medical conditions and how to treat them. I was one of those nerds who, my mom had a medical encyclopedia and I would actually rifle through it. And back then I used to be absolutely fascinated, for example, by infectious diseases and what caused them and how to treat them. So it honestly became pretty obvious to me that, hey, pharmacy is probably a really great fit. And I genuinely never considered doing anything else. So I was pretty set in stone when I entered college. I knew what my path was going to be at that point.
I see. So when you got into pharmacy school and when you went through your training there, did you have any idea that this is where you would end up like today in, med affairs? Or was that something like you kind of learn on the way? Because, at least for me, when I would join pharmacy school, when I started, I didn't really know of these different career paths. All I really knew was inpatient or community, right? So did you know, or is that something that you also learned later on?
Yeah, I have to chuckle at that question. I did not know. I genuinely had no idea. That, much like you, and even going through school, our training was focused either on the clinical pharmacy pathway, if you will. I'm a University of Illinois Chicago grad. We have an amazing clinical pharmacy program there, or community, retail. And so that was really all I knew. And in pharmacy school, I knew pretty quickly that I was not going to go down the retail path. I just fell in love with clinical practice. And interestingly, during school, I probably knew my second year in pharmacy school, I'm going to go do a residency. By my third year, I knew I was a very driven student. And so I knew that it was either going to be in critical care or cardiology, one of the two. And then P4 year hit and life took a turn for my husband and I, where we just honestly ended up running out of money. We didn't take enough school loans, so not the best financial planning at the time. But it ended up being an amazing turn of events, because that led me at graduation to take a job we'll certainly get into that in a bit. But that actually put me on a career path where I did get the opportunity to be exposed to an incredible variety of pharmacy professionals, non-pharmacy professionals, multidisciplinary clinicians, non-clinicians, and every career step that I've ever taken, every role that I've ever had, it's almost felt like building and building and building. It's really been a gift, and that eventually led me. I had no idea medical affairs and med tech existed. I certainly knew it existed in pharma, but honestly, until I started working for my current company, I had no idea that there was such a thing in med tech. And so sometimes you learn along the way, and sometimes you learn pretty far down in your career path about what is out there and how big the world is for our profession and the options that we have.
Thanks for sharing that. And I was looking into your career journey, and I did notice it. Like you said, you fell in love with clinical practice, so you started off as a clinical pharmacy specialist
Mhm.
around that time. And I did also see that at that same time, it looks like you were also doing something called like a pharmacy information systems coordinator.
Mhm.
Can you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, I can. So, I touched on in pharmacy school, my fourth year, I had planned to go do, very likely a PGY2 in critical care residency. And, life happened and I took a different path. I ended up having to go find a job as a pharmacist. And so I'd been working as a pharmacy tech at a health system in Chicago. And my boss there had opened up a brand new role. It was actually a dual role. So essentially, part time clinical specialist. And then the other half of the job was essentially brand new, never existed in the health system. And it was called the Pharmacy Information Systems Coordinator. Basically, what that part of the job was, I was hired to actually lead and be a part of our Epic implementation journey. And this was actually not a normal implementation type of role. We were actually Epic's alpha development partner for quite a few of their early products back then. And so I had an opportunity to really work very closely with engineers and developers and to help shape and design what have now become very widely used products. It was pretty amazing opportunity. But I think what was unique about that, if you will, from a career trajectory standpoint, about that first role, I really did have two jobs back in those early years. I even reflect back when I think of how many hours I worked. I don't know that I'm necessarily proud of it today, but it was something I had to do. And, again, sometimes you just need the money because you've got loans to pay off, right? Or cars to fix, that kind of thing. But I had, it ended up being an amazing career builder because part of my role, I had to work as a clinical specialist, and I ended up specializing in med surge primarily. I did a little stint too in pediatrics and some geriatric care as well, but primarily med surge was my specialty. And just had the health system I worked for was extremely progressive. They had a very mature clinical pharmacy practice program, and so I got to do things as a clinician, again, mind you, without a residency that today would almost be unheard of. It was an amazing leadership team, very visionary pharmacists, pharmacy leaders. And it really was an opportunity to learn both practice, but then to also end up specializing and almost helping develop a part of our profession, pharmacy informatics, that at the time, while it existed, it looked very different than what we think of pharmacy informatics today. Very unique opportunity for sure.
So I guess like from that point, right? Like getting on experience, like did you go like full on into it, or did you go back to clinical practice? Like I've seen like you kind of jump around
Mhm.
different types of roles. So I was just curious about like, jumping to those roles of being a supervisor and ops manager, like going back into that
Yeah.
side. did you still continue some of that technology aspects, or how did that work?
Yeah, I really great question actually. So, after working as in that dual role, so clinical specialist slash informaticist, I ended up after a few years into doing that, we'd implemented our EMR and other technology programs. I'd worked very closely with the developers. And the way my head is wired, I need big projects all the time. And so I started getting, frankly, a little bit bored because all of the excitement of go lives was over. The big implementations were over. And, I was kind of looking around going, okay, well, now what? What am I going to do? And, I had the great fortune of being mentored by some incredible leaders. And so eventually I decided I was going to go back to school and get an MBA because I started to realize that while I absolutely loved technology and was so passionate about, hey, how can we leverage technology? How can we use technology to improve our profession? What I started to realize was I actually also equally love great operations. I love things to run smoothly. I like to fix things so that if they're broken, I want them to run smoothly after we get in there and can tinker with them and can transform what operations look like. And I love to lead people. And so that led me to get an MBA, which also ended up being a very important career pivot, but probably one of the most important things I'd ever done in that it really did equip me with not only just those basic leadership skills, but I think it also then opened my eyes to this whole world of, hey, financial management, business management, healthcare, whether we like it or not, is a business. And if you want it to run well, you do need to use good business principles to manage it well. And so that's what that gave me. And then at the end of that MBA, I decided to take a plunge. I really wanted to be a people leader. And then that's what led me to, if you will, essentially leave. We ended up moving as well, moved across the country. And I started to take a succession of people leadership roles. I led a variety of different operations, outpatient ops, inpatient ops. I eventually became director of pharmacy. So took on PIC roles, et cetera. But even throughout those, if you look on paper, yes, they are very, if you will, traditionally operational roles. Technology was never far from my scope. And so whether it was I was pulled in to the latest and greatest health system that I was working with to support their EMR go live, or I was actually the one putting together business cases for new technologies. I was always involved in every single role I've ever had in some sort of technology rollout or transformation effort in the systems that I worked for. And so, again, never very far for me from those initial roots that I started to put down in informatics. And if anything, I would even say that if I could phrase it this way, I pro- I probably became a better informaticist during those years because I also simultaneously became a expert in operations, if you will, and financial management and all the things that go with managing a complex pharmacy operation, an enterprise. And
So along the way, along all these periods of like when you were working in the directorial role with your aspects of like still being involved in technology, at some point the pharmacy informatics primer was published, and I wanted to ask you about that and kind of like your involvement and your inspiration for being involved with the pharmacy informatics primer.
yeah, the book had a I think it's an intriguing story at least, but I thought well, back when I was in pharmacy school, like all of us do in grad school, we usually have a group of friends, close group of friends that ends up being our study group and you end up being friends for life with. But in my group, I used to tell my colleagues folks, I'm going to write a book someday. And they would look at me like cross-eyed going, okay, that's kind of a weird career goal. But I love to write, and I was probably a better writer than I was a speaker, especially back then. And for me, writing was a way to pull out what was inside my head and to say it a bit more eloquently. So fast forward to, I'd been practicing for a number of years in that first role as a dual clinical pharmacist and informaticist. And in that role, I also had the opportunity to do a lot of speaking engagements. We were Our organization was a pioneer organization. This was back in the very, very early days of EMR and CPOE implementations. And so we would get asked to do talks frequently. And so I did a lot of stage presentations, a lot of panels, a lot of interviews, and I started to notice that everyone would ask the same thing. I mean, I practically could have recorded a few of those and just played back my answers because we would get those questions so frequently. And so I just decided one day, I woke up one day and I'm thinking, you know what? I'm kind of tired of repeating myself. Somebody should just write a book about this. And then I realized, you know what? Why shouldn't I write the book? So just as it just so happens, I also was getting more and more involved with ASHP, and I had started to become a bit known back then. And so I'd done some talks through the organization and at our meetings. And so they approached me with this idea of, hey, would now be a good time to potentially consider writing a book. And so put together a proposal accepted, and the book was born. I had an amazing opportunity to work with some incredible participants in the book. There are different authors for each chapter, but very proud of the work we did back then, especially because it really touched on a lot of topics that every organization struggled with, certainly at the time. And ironically, I still get, when I meet new folks from organizations, they'll tell me, hey, we're still trying to implement some of these technologies that are still not in every single healthcare organization. So that's how it came to be born.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's 2024 now, and I was looking at some of the, topics and
Yeah.
chapters in there, like smart pumps. Like, come on, like it's still being integrated nowadays. It's
I
not fully
know.
interoperable. So, and the book was, let me see, it was published in 2008.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Late
that's
'08,
crazy.
early '09. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
know it is, right? Let that sink in. 15 years ago, and here we are, right? Like,
yeah.
why?
I mean, and the
Yeah.
topics that you put in the book are still topics of like,
Yeah.
actively being implemented, actively being improved on nowadays, and it's not
Yeah.
fully there yet. I mean, I don't think we'll ever be fully there. Like, we'll get
Yeah.
pretty close, but still,
Yeah.
there's always going to be some kind of improvement.
Definitely.
So,
And, Tony, it was also meant to be a foundational book. I think that was the other thing. I didn't necessarily want to write something that would be outdated, if you will.
mhm.
And so as we wrote each chapter, we were very thoughtful about, what are the building blocks? What the good building blocks, the key takeaways. So for example, that smart pumps chapter, what is absolutely critical when an organization is going through a smart pump journey? What do they need to think about? What do they need to make sure that they address in their implementation and rollout? So that's the feel of the whole book, is just those basic foundational building blocks, which I think honestly certainly aren't much different today. The details are different, but the key questions that you have to consider have not changed.
I mean, it's really great to kind of see that, you've had that forethought of when you wrote the book the first time with the different authors, that these kind of questions were being addressed in a way that it will still be actively thought about in the future. And then that foundational like book is still resourceful for even today's practices. But like switching gears from, writing that book back into like your practice, we can go into talking about your practice today. And your current role is like a senior director of medical affairs. But what exactly does that mean? And I know you can't really talk about specifics, but more of like a high level overview of like the things that you're involved in today in terms of like, healthcare technology and aspects like that.
Yeah, yeah, I would love to. I wake up every day, Tony, and I really do. I feel very, very blessed to be able to get to do what I do today. But I will say, when I'm at a party or I'm meeting new people and they ask me, "So, what do you do?" And you say medical affairs. I've stopped saying I'm a pharmacist anymore because that just conjures up different things in people's heads. So you say med affairs, but you get this blank stare of what on earth is that? And I think if I were to sum it up, and this is the way I usually explain it, medical affairs is a function, and certainly in med tech, but you'll see this generally across industry as a whole. We're sometimes described as the medical conscience of an organization. Translation, the voice of the patient or the clinician back to the business. Every day, I do a lot of things every day, but one of the key things that I get to do is I translate. I translate. For example, if I am meeting with my clinician customers, I do a lot of visits to pharmacies all over the U.S. and across the world, actually. But when I visit clinicians, I'm one of them. We are peers. I speak their language, they speak mine. But then insights and what I see and what I speak about and issues that we talk about in practice, I get to bring those back into my day job because fundamentally what my organization does is it develops technology solutions to help improve how care is delivered. I'm personally absolutely passionate about that. But in order to know what technology solutions to develop, you have to be very clear on what are the clinical needs that our clinicians and our patients have. We can't just start building things if we don't understand what clinical problems we're solving, especially when it comes to workflows. So that, if you will, a very, very high level summary of what medical affairs is. And in my particular role, it's certainly that, but it's quite a few more other things. So some of the other things that I have the opportunity to do is not only do I support new product development and business strategy development, but I also lead a research operations as part of the business unit that I am in. So very, very excited to be part of, for example, leading and standing up research studies to look at the impact that technology has and specifically measured impact that technology has on healthcare operations and clinical practice. And then I also get involved in, for example, regulatory and public policy topics. So, for example, partnering with organizations to take a look at our regulations or our care standards. Technology is evolving rapidly, but standards and regulations move very slowly. And so it's very important that we make sure that those two things stay in lockstep and work in parallel. And so that I would say in a nutshell is what I do. Very high level, lots of details there, lots of examples, but high level, that's what I get to do every day. It's never the same job in any given day. It's not even a job. It's so much more than that. It really is. And this is what I am so thankful for every single day. The work I do today, even though the tasks may be different or the projects I'm involved in are different, but the work I get to do today, it impacts millions and millions of patients. And it's something that I never dreamed I could ever do. I thought I got to do that with thousands of patients when I was in practice. But when you think about the scale that technology has and the impact it can have on care, it's pretty humbling and incredible to be able to be a part of that every day.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I think like for me going into pharmacy informatics, that's what I was thinking about too. I know mine is a much smaller scale because it's a hospital system, but the idea of like impacting just the entire hospital system from the work I do, it's pretty cool. It's pretty
It's
crazy.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, going back onto like your role today, I guess one of the questions I didn't ask yet was how did you get into that role? Like, what was the point that, that made you kind of want to get into that role? And also, like, what were the steps that you took that eventually led you into it?
Yeah. Also a very good question because I definitely did not start in industry in this role. I had a different role. And my current company was the company that was my career pivot, if you will. Right before I came to BD, my last role in practice was as a director of pharmacy at a large health system in Texas. But my first role at BD was actually leading and helping create a few different product implementation teams. And so I did that role for 3 years, where part of it was essentially creating a brand new team from scratch for a product that we had acquired, and then also integrating other products into a multi-product implementation team. It was actually an incredibly complex role. I had to work with global colleagues and customers from around the world. That was actually very neat and completely unique and different. I'd never done anything like that before. But it also allowed me to see almost every part of a med tech business industry because I worked with so many different disciplines and functions here. And so in those 3 years, I got to see a lot. So as that role evolved and my time in that role evolved, while I absolutely loved it and the team I was a part of was incredible, and I got to travel to many different places around the world, which was amazing. But the one thing I couldn't do in that role was be a pharmacist because the skills I needed for that role were very heavily business. They were operations and not clinical operations. This is straight business operations and consulting management, that kind of thing. And I I really did miss being able to use that clinical operations part of my brain. And so it just so happened that at the time our business unit was going through a bit of a reorganization, if you will. And we had a new medical leader that came on board, and he essentially created what is now a much more structured, if you will, and very formal medical affairs organization. So he tapped me on the shoulder, said, "Hey, you want to come be a pharmacist on my team?" And all I heard was, "Do you want to come be a pharmacist?" And for me, that was all it took. While obviously it's not pharmacist in the sense of I'm dispensing and taking care of patients anymore, but the beauty about this current role is that it does allow me to leverage every single shred of clinical practice experience I'd ever had, from frontline, even back when I was working as a pharmacy tech, to a healthcare organization leader. All of that experience I'm able to leverage in this current role and in medical affairs. So I've been doing it now for almost 5 years and still counting. It's still fun every single day.
That's awesome. Yeah, like one of the things I was going to ask too was related to the whole part about like earlier when you said that if people ask you what you do and you don't really say pharmacist. I do want to ask about like where do you see kind of pharmacists being involved in technology innovation nowadays? Now that you've been in it for quite some
Mhm.
time and you've been working with different organizations, where do you kind of see the role of a pharmacist going in terms of like how integrated they should be in that area of like being more knowledgeable in healthcare technology?
Yeah, I this is such an important question, Tony. I think that when we look at the big issues, if we just take a step back and we zoom out and we look at, especially in the US, but this is also true in other parts of the world, but in the US specifically, if you look at the big healthcare practice issues that we're struggling with, one of them, well, we have many, right? But some of those biggest issues, especially related to access of care, cost of care, these issues are issues that pharmacists are uniquely positioned to help address. Drug costs, we see this, right? There's a news story almost every day about our escalating drug costs, especially in the US, especially with these new types of biological therapies, specialty pharmacy medications. It's, you know, it requires a very specialized skill set to manage that. And again, pharmacists are very unique in that we have both those financial business management skills and operational management skills, but we're also very clinically focused and oriented. And so in it, as we look as technology is continuing to evolve and there seems to be a new tech startup, several a day, it almost feels like sometimes, especially when I go to conferences. So everyone is, there's a lot of folks trying to enter this space and provide technology solutions. I think it's important for pharmacists to not let those technologies happen to us. We need to be part of those solutions. It's critical that we as a profession get engaged because the interesting thing, and this is something that we could spend hours talking about. I'm very passionate about this topic, but uh, there are things that only pharmacists can do. And unfortunately, our profession, we've been beaten up a little bit over the last few years, right? A lot of our clinicians are exhausted, they're tired, I frequently get contacted by clinicians and fellow pharmacists that just don't want to do it anymore. They're throwing in the towel. We cannot let that happen. We simply cannot, because there are problems in healthcare that only we can help solve. And technology is one of the critical ways and vehicles that we're going to solve those issues. So we got to get involved. Don't let it happen to us. Let's take this by the reins and let's drive these technology solutions to where we need them to go.
That's generally how I feel about it too, in terms of like being at the table rather than, just letting things happen. Kind of apply to the next question too, in which, of course, everybody's talking about AI right now. Ever since ChatGPT was released, everyone's been talking about AI more so than before. AI was more simple, right? And there were actually specific algorithms. You kind of understood that they were still kind of pre-programmed, and sometimes AI was used as a buzzword. Nowadays, I'm not saying it's not a buzzword anymore, but it's like it just feels more real because,
Yeah.
OpenAI, ChatGPT, all that stuff. So what do you think about that in terms of AI in the future of the profession?
Oh, I love this question too. So I agree completely with what you shared. So maybe a bit more color and thoughts on it though. So AI is absolutely here, and it is moving faster than our traditionally very risk averse profession would like. That's just pharmacists are known for that, right? We don't generally like to take big risks. We like to keep things safe, and we like to take our time just mulling things over. Let's think about it. Let's evaluate what this change might do to our profession. And I think that for me, those days are over. And I think we as a profession really need to shift in how we approach, especially with the advent of AI, because AI is not waiting for us. This is a train that has long left the station, and we're playing a little bit of catch up, I feel like, at the moment. And so, but I do think, if we muster here, we're going to get on board and get engaged and, help drive where this is going as opposed to letting it drive us, if you will. But to your point of where is it going, I think it's already here. And I think we do need to be educated on, first and foremost, what can it do? What can it not do? It is absolutely critical, especially as scientists, as clinician scientists, if you will. Don't take a billboard's word for it. Don't take a social media's post for it. Show me the data. Because there's lots of promises made, but if we don't see it materialized in real outcomes, whether they be outcomes rather, or clinical care outcomes, then it's just promises, right? It's just technology just saying that it'll do stuff. So I think that's first and foremost. Educate and ask to see real data with real outcomes. The other thing is this is going to evolve, continue to evolve very quickly. There are today things that have changed just in the past year and a half since ChatGPT got released. Literature searches, right? How many hours have you and I both not spent in our careers doing lit searches? Hours and hours, sometimes days, depending on how complex the questions were. AI is here and it can absolutely do this more efficiently than we could as humans. And we get results in minutes, not hours or days. That's amazing. There's other things that have been automated that are currently being even more automated with AI. So think about things like very rote tasks like or in the inpatient setting, orders verification. We've long had that, but where the technology is going, that's going to radically change in the future as well. Filling prescription bottles, another very rote task traditionally that, I do see the advent of AI and related technologies revolutionizing these very, very rote tasks. And some of these things are here already. So I think understanding what's here already, but then also where is it going or where do we want it to go as a profession? I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like, yes, the technology is here, but we shouldn't be, I don't know, like this is my opinion of like, let's not be scared of it. Let's see what it can do
Yes.
for us. And, if we have a seat at the table, we have a say in kind of where it goes and how it can affect our profession. And these are great for tools. Like I think, like you said, there are opportunities where they are very useful for us, but we have to also be there to make sure that it's being applied correctly and it's not going to be forced to try to replace us in things that it cannot replace us in. So yeah, I think like there's still so much discussion. I get this question from students all the time too about like AI and how it's going to affect the future of the profession. And it's kind of like, it's a discussion and you just have to be there for it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I agree. Again, passionate about this topic of don't let it happen to you, right? Let's be part of it. Let's embrace it. I am personally very excited about what I've seen the technologies are doing today, but then also the potential they're bringing. I'm actually thrilled and excited about what they can bring. Thinking back to practice, right? To the things we used to do that were so time consuming. I don't want to do those things. I'd love for technology to take work off my plate that doesn't let me maximize the use of my clinical training. And that used to sound more like a marketing spiel, if you will. Well, it's not marketing anymore. I mean, these technologies do enable that type of practice change. And I think that's incredible. But yes, let's be at the table. Let us write those rules. Let us write those regulatory guidelines that need to change as well. I don't want someone other than a pharmacist professional helping shape those rules and those regulations and those practice standards that incorporate these technologies of the future. We need to be there. We need to join professional organizations, be part of advocacy work, active advocacy work, and embrace what's coming and help shape it. Let's do it together, right?
Yeah, definitely. And like on that note, what are some pieces of advice that you'd like to share to those students or pharmacists that are interested in learning more or being more involved in the healthcare technology space?
Yeah, I get this question a lot too. I as you said, you do as well. For me, I have the same answer every time. Sometimes it's not the most popular answer, but here it is. You you won't know till you see it in action, and what that means is you do need, especially as a young pharmacist professional, you need to invest some time in what I call the trenches of practice. Whether that be at a minimum, certainly a residency program, if you're going to start in that pathway, or actual practice, taking care of patients in whatever setting. But it does start there because you have to truly become an expert in those processes that make up our practice. If you don't know how meds are dispensed, and if you are not able to describe the journey of a dose from the back door of that pharmacy to to the time it gets to the patient and how they take it, you don't know enough. So that's first and foremost. But as you are spending that time in those day-to-day patient care activities, I think really looking at, okay, I use technology every single day in my practice. How is this technology birth? How is it updated? How is it implemented? Oh, my organization is just announced a big new technology implementation. Raise your hand, volunteer for those projects. And if you're not sure that this is something you want to do, just try it. Just volunteer for it. It may be that you find out, you know what, this is not my jam. And, did this one project that's good enough for me. I'll do something else next time. But chances are you might end up loving it so much, you end up making a career out of it. And I think at least for me, some of the most inspiring career journeys I've ever heard from mentors and colleagues have been those moments when you just raised your hand and volunteered for something that almost seemed like a random project. And here you are 15, 20 years later in somewhere that you never dreamed you'd be. It's pretty amazing. And Tony, I just thought, and maybe I'll add just a couple more thoughts to that too. I think the other thing is, play the long game, right? I think especially these days we're so distracted. Our attention is pulled in so many different directions. And so it's easy to just fixate on my job today or my job right now. I can't see past the next few years. But soak up every moment and every experience you have, even on those days where it's just hard to get through today. Take a few minutes, reflect on what did I learn today? What was one impact that I had today? And play that long game. And don't lose sight of each experience is going to be an amazing building block for the future. And then I'll also say, don't be afraid to dream beyond the pharmacy that you know right now, beyond those four walls of pharmacy. Just know that there's pharmacy outside of the country, outside of those four walls. There's amazing things to see and do out there and to have impact. And just open your eyes and start looking at the world around you, especially the world of healthcare, maybe a little bit differently, and start asking why. And maybe that'll lead you down a path, again, that you never thought you'd end up on.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all that advice. I'm pretty sure the listeners really appreciate that. If they had any more questions for you, what's the best way that they can reach you?
Yeah, best way for me is either feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message, and that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And I do love to get those and happy to connect and get to know folks that way as well.
Awesome. So I'll be putting a link for people to reach out to you in the show notes. But, to be respectful of your time, thank you so much again for being on the podcast today and talking about your career journey and also like the future of the profession and all the different pieces of advice that you gave about getting into the career path too.
Thanks so much, Tony. I had a fun time and really enjoyed talking to you. I appreciate the time.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pharmacy IT and Me podcast. If you did, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. It really helps us reach more people who might be interested in learning more about pharmacy, informatics, and technology. If you would like to suggest a topic or somebody to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I can be best reached on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, technology is the tool, patient care is the goal.